All right, first, let me begin by introducing our healthcare team, or at least a part of it. On the far left, your right, I guess, is Sarah Rice, who leads our healthcare team as Deputy Chief of the Civil Division and Head of the Public Protection Unit. Next to her is Julia Harvey, who is our healthcare advocate and is steeped in healthcare policy and really helps me really understand things about healthcare that I wouldn't understand otherwise. On this side is Rick Gemma, who was a year ahead of me in law school, which means he's a little bit older than me. So I'm not the oldest person in the office. Makes me feel better. But more importantly, Rick has a wealth of experience in insolvency and bankruptcy. We brought him on board a couple of years ago because, notwithstanding what you might hear elsewhere, Rhode Island is not doing well in healthcare. We are not highly ranked in healthcare. We have significant healthcare challenges. And it was not a surprise to me that we would be having insolvency issues and that we would need someone like Rick on staff to help us navigate them. So we are here today to announce the issuance of our decision today, an amended decision approving the sale of Roger Williams and Fatima Hospitals to the Centurion Corporation with the approval, or with the anticipated approval, of the bankruptcy court in Dallas, Texas. We're here today because the conditions of our original decision could not be met by Centurion. Again, that did not come as a shock to me, and perhaps not to others. There has been plenty of speculation in the media and publicly about the ability of Centurion to close this deal and to sell the bonds that they needed to sell to close it. And so what we're going to walk through today is how the conditions have changed, how they have not changed, and the additional protections that I believe we've secured on behalf of the hospitals as a result of the change in financial circumstances that led Centurion to come to us seeking relief from the original conditions. So just to recap how we got here, because this has been a complicated and long journey. So if you go back to December of 2023, that was when this office and RIDO, the Department of Health, deemed the application to transfer Roger Williams and Fatima Hospitals away from what I call the mothership, Prospect National in California, to the Centurion Foundation. That application then, as is the state of play today, would change these hospitals from a for-profit status to a nonprofit status, which is, in my view, a good thing. In June of last year, a little over a year ago, both this office and the Department of Health issued separate decisions conditionally approving the transaction. These conditions I want to go over now were, for me at least, the most important ones, and it were these financial conditions that I believed, and we believed, were critical to giving the hospitals an opportunity to move forward without Prospect National. Prospect National was in a bad state in any event. It was important to get these hospitals away from Prospect National. But we believed then, and they were conditions of our decision then, because we believed this was the kind of financial footing that these hospitals needed to get started at a minimum. And so there were really two buckets of funding back then that we focused in on. One was what we referred to as the initial hospital funding. That was $80 million, which Centurion proposed to raise on the bond market. That would give the new hospital system, new charter care, if you will, Roger Williams and Fatima Hospitals sort of operating on their own. The cash they would need to operate a hospital system, pay vendors and the like, make capital investments, this was money they needed to come from somewhere, and they proposed to raise it on the bond market. There was a separate hospital fund which would be comprised of $66.8 million. That was envisioned to include $50 million, which this office had recovered from Leonard Green, that private equity firm that once owned Prospect, and Prospect National. If you recall, that $50 million is a portion of the $80 million that back in 2021, this office required Prospect National to put in escrow to ensure that the hospitals would stay open. So they only got that money back as they kept the hospitals open. Today, with interest, that amount that is remaining is $50 million as a result of the concerns that we had and frankly violations from my perspective of the original conditions by Prospect National. We were able to secure that money, that $50 million, what was left of the escrow with interest for these hospitals, free and clear of any claim by Leonard Green. And part of this money was Leonard Green's. We forced them essentially to relinquish their claim to the money. And that I think if, when I'm gone from here, that is something that I will be most proud of when it comes to the work of the healthcare team, both those members behind me and others that have worked so hard over the last 4 years, and in particular the last 18 months, to squeeze that money out of Leonard Green and Prospect National and have that cash available to these safety net hospitals. So the bottom line is that $66.8 million, $50 million was going to be the cash that we've recovered, and 16.8 was also going to be financed by Centurion. So, all right, so not entirely surprising to most people, including me, after we issued that decision, Prospect National filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Dallas, Texas. And this had always been one of the concerns of me and the team, was that if there were an insolvency event, that insolvency event would not be here in Rhode Island, where we would have a say as to how that would proceed going forward, but it would be in the hands of a federal bankruptcy judge far from Rhode Island who may or may not be terribly concerned about the ongoing viability of these three hospitals. I will say that the bankruptcy judge here has been very accommodating to the office. We've had an attorney that we've retained there at every bankruptcy proceeding since day one, and the bankruptcy judge, she has just been really great in giving us an opportunity to try to keep these hospitals going here. In Rhode Island, that's not happening in other states. The ones that are owned by Prospect in Connecticut, for example, their fate is somewhat up in the air. The hospitals in Pennsylvania, to my knowledge, are being sold off as real estate assets, not as going concerns, because they couldn't find a buyer. So, notwithstanding that Prospect filed for bankruptcy, we have been able to convince the bankruptcy court collectively with the parties to allow this transaction to go forward. But one thing I want to be very clear about is that willingness of the bankruptcy judge to allow the transaction to go forward didn't eliminate our conditions. So even with the bankruptcy court's approval, Centurion, New Charter Care still had to, and Prospect had to comply with our conditions. So, earlier this month, I got a call from counsel for Centurion wanting to have coffee. And in my experience with counsel for Centurion, it's the same counsel for some other healthcare entities in the state. Whenever he wants to have coffee, that is usually bad news. And so anticipating that the news wasn't going to be good, we did have coffee. And he told me that Centurion was having difficulty selling the amount of bonds necessary to fully fund that $80 million hospital financing, initial hospital funding bucket. And they proposed over the next several weeks closing the transaction with only $45 million in that initial hospital bucket, leaving a $35 million shortfall from our initial condition. That gave me some concern. Why? Well, if you go back to when we had public comment on this transaction, when we were evaluating it in the first instance, we heard from a lot of people, including UNAP, Chris Kalachi, who I don't know if he's here, but counsel for UNAP, Lynn, many of her colleagues were quite concerned about whether or not this transaction was viable. At the end of the day, we approved it, but we approved it with the conditions I've already gone over, trying to make the new entity as viable as possible in a difficult healthcare landscape, while serving a patient mix which in Rhode Island does not typically lead to strong financial outcomes or strong financial health. So I was quite concerned about that, and frankly was prepared to not agree to an amended decision, and if necessary, if at the end of the day Prospect and Centurion couldn't meet our conditions, to have the case go back to bankruptcy court for whatever outcome might happen there. You know, we would have advocated strongly for a sale there, seek a buyer for these hospitals, and I would have worked with the team, and I'm sure others in Rhode Island, very hard to make that happen. But I was concerned enough about the change in circumstances, that $35 million hole, that the negotiations frankly became pretty intense, let's put it that way. So at the end of the day, though, we did agree to amend our decision and to change our conditions. So I think it's important first to go through what hasn't changed. So that hospital fund that I mentioned, that has our $50 million in it, when I say our, I mean the state's, that we hold in a state account on behalf of the state. That hospital fund will be exactly the same. That $50 million that we now hold in a state escrow account will be transferred at closing to the hospitals for their benefit going forward. Centurion can raise the $16.8 million difference, and that will be included at closing. The turnaround consultant, one of our conditions early on was to require Centurion, because these hospitals have not historically done well, to bring somebody on board to assist management in making sure they had the best chance possible to improve their bottom line and make capital investments so that they could survive in this tough healthcare environment. We have now amended our conditions to require that turnaround consultant be hired with our approval prior to closing, rather than allowing it to happen after closing. I said to Centurion, you've had enough time to get somebody on board. We want to know who it is and we want to approve it. That's going to happen before closing. So you still need a turnaround consultant. That hasn't changed, but what has changed is they have to do it sooner. All service lines will continue. There will continue to be capital investments, including repairs and upgrades to various parts of the hospitals. And there will continue to be a robust monitoring, reporting, and notice requirements. We're going to know what's going on out there in real time, so that if we see some warning flags, we'll be in a position to respond. What is different? So this is what's different. So we've approved a modified bond financing strategy, which I'll get into, which is responsive to those challenges on the bond market. In exchange, what we insisted on in exchange were 4 new conditions and 9 amended conditions. And what those conditions are allowed to do, frankly, is to give us triggers should these hospitals not do well in the next several months, including outfacing months and years. It will give us sufficient notice to take action, which I'll get into in a little more detail. All right, so let's go through those a little bit here. So what I think will be of most interest, and has been the subject of most talk to date, is that initial hospital funding, the bond financing, which, as I said, there have been some rumblings and some concerns that they would not, that Centurion would not be able to raise it. So we've agreed to lower, as they requested, to lower that amount raised on the bond funding by closing to $45 million. But what we have required them to do within 90 days after the closing, and it will be a violation of our decision and our conditions if they don't do it, is to secure that additional $35 million within 90 days, so that the initial hospital funding will be trued up within 90 days of closing. So you might ask, I'll anticipate a question, which is that, okay, if they can't raise it beforehand, why should I be confident they can't raise it afterwards? They have given me assurances in writing, and they are assurances that can be relied on in my judgment, that at a minimum they will have what's called PACE funding as a source to fill that $35 million hole. PACE funding has to be used for capital investments that typically involve energy efficiency, but there are lots of ways that money can be used in these hospital systems to increase their energy efficiency, and they go towards this requirement of investing in the hospitals that has had me so concerned. One of the things that I really wanted to do is to make sure that the $50 million that the team worked so hard to squeeze out of Leonard Green and Prospect National, I can tell you they did not give up the $50 million willingly. Most private equity firms tend to take money, they don't tend to give it back. But what was really concerning to me was I didn't want to have the management out there at New CharterCare blow through that money as cash and operating expenses and not invest back in the hospitals. I wanted to make sure that at least $50 million, the $50 million that we've recovered, that I feel like I have the most control over, frankly, would be used to enhance the brick and mortar and equipment of the hospital, so that if we end up in another insolvency situation, at least the hospitals as institutions, as brick and mortar, have been improved. So we haven't blown through 140 some odd million dollars of cash. We haven't made any investments in the hospitals themselves, whether it be equipment or repairs or upgrades. So as you'll see in our conditions, PACE is a source and a likely source, in my view, of that truing up funding. But if they can raise it from other places, then they are free to do so. As I just mentioned, I've been concerned about investment in the brick and mortar of these hospitals. And so we're requiring within 3 years of closing that Centurion and the New CharterCare system spend at least $50 million on capital expenditures at the hospitals. Go back up a little bit. So the decision also, as much as I care about brick and mortar, I care the most about, I think we all do, about patients, providers, and workers. And so what I said to Centurion was, in my negotiations with Mr. Mingle and counsel and bond counsel was, look, the state, through the $50 million that we're effectively transferring to their corporation, we made them stronger. In many ways, the state, not using taxpayer funds, but nevertheless, the state is their biggest investor. And I wanted to make sure that if I saw things going the wrong way out there, that we would be able to step in and take action. As the biggest investor, I felt like we had as much, frankly, more stake in these hospitals than somebody buying a bond through Barclays. So, as I said to them, I don't know that they'll find another single investor that's going to invest $50 million cash in these hospitals. So what we really insisted on was enhanced financial reporting and notice requirements. We wanted to see proof of their capital expenditures. We wanted written notice of their financing shortfalls, including cash on hand and bond financing. We have the right under our new conditions, under certain circumstances, to retain a consultant to report on their financial and operation state of play if their days of cash on hand fall below 40. We have the right to put a non-voting representative on their boards if the days cash on hand falls below 30. And so days cash on hand is a sign of financial vulnerability of a hospital system. as I understand it, most of our Rhode Island hospitals are under 100. If we were doing as well in healthcare as some like to think, they would all be well over 100. But they're not, they're 100 or less. So that gives you a sense of where we see things at the beginning or the middle of a downward spiral. We want to be learning about things in real time, and these two conditions will allow us to do that. And the decision also gives us a more robust protection in the event of a bankruptcy or an insolvency. Basically, what I wanted, what I really was looking for in exchange for flexibility on the financing up front was I wanted the ability to petition a receiver here in Rhode Island, if necessary, to reinvent these hospitals, if necessary, here in Rhode Island. I did not want to end up in a bankruptcy court, in a federal bankruptcy court, either here in Rhode Island or somewhere else like Dallas. That gives us the least amount of control when we're far afield like this. So what I was looking for was, as a condition of flexibility here, that we had the right, and they would not contest our ability as the state, if we saw things going the wrong way, to petition a superior court here to put them into receivership. That would allow a judge, Judge Stern has served so well in this role in the past, Judge Silverstein before him, in reinventing insolvent hospitals and allowing them to survive. And so that was really important to me and to the team, and so our amended decision provides for it. And this is just a quote from me, so we'll just leave that up there and you're free to read it or not. So that's really where we are today. They couldn't raise the money on the bond market. They wanted relief from that condition. We agreed to it, but we agreed to it only if they could true it up within 90 days. I'm convinced that they can do that. I have the assurances, and I've seen them in writing. I'm convinced they can do that. If they don't, they'll be in violation of our decision, and then anything is possible. In return, we have got a commitment for capital expenditures, at least up to the $50 million that we've recovered for these hospitals, and we have the ability to take steps if they begin to spiral downwards. I can't stand here today and tell Rhode Islanders or the workers or the providers that these hospitals will be thriving and robust 18 months from now or 6 months from now. I don't know that. Much will depend on new management, Centurion, the turnaround council, turnaround consultant, to get these hospitals out on their own and thriving. They're going to have to be nimble. It's really hard in Rhode Island to do well as a healthcare system. Recently there was a lot of news about Brown and the maternity ward there. Well, if you look at the numbers, if you talk to people in healthcare, they'll tell you that if you're not having 500 births a year, it's very hard to break even on a maternity operation. We're going to be having fewer births in Rhode Island going forward. That's true of our demographics across the country. So hospital systems are having to make real hard choices because of our unwillingness, frankly, in government to address this head on. And until we do that, we're going to continue to see these issues arising. It's almost like, you solve one problem as it emerges, but then when you do that, another arises. So I don't want to stand here and assure Rhode Islanders and gaslight them and make them believe or have them believe that all the problems have been solved. They haven't. But we have made some steps forward. We're going from a for-profit to a nonprofit status, which is a good thing. The hospitals will stay open. They won't close as they did or as is happening in Pennsylvania and may happen in part in Connecticut. We have the ability to take steps if they don't improve very, very quickly. And so my hope is that a year from now, somewhere, some of you will be interviewing me about the state of healthcare, and Roger Williams and Fatima won't come up. We spent a lot of time on them over the last 4 years. It was a little ironic to me that I was getting a lot of emails about Newport, which I was sympathetic to and certainly concerned about. But we had two hospitals here that frankly, could have easily closed. And so service line is important, especially maternity at community hospitals. I was born at South County Hospital. My sons were born at South County Hospital. I know how important that is. But in the scheme of things, when what's top of mind for me is the potential closure of 2 hospitals, we are not in a good place, and we're going to have to continue to work on it. Much work to do ahead. So I'll leave it there and take any questions you have.
So I think we're all trying to hear good news on some level, you think, and the changes, and you think you got good conditions, and Centurion thinks this will work. We also hear what a difficult situation these hospitals are already in, what they're going to be in. I mean, when you look at all of this in totality and what's going to happen now that you've made these changes, how likely is it that these hospitals are going to close?
Well, they're not going to close right away. We know that. I mean, there's, they'll get the financing they need, and this is what we predicted in our original decision. We predicted, I don't know if it's spelled out in there, but we predicted that with this amount of cash on hand or financing, we believe, I'm going to turn to Julia, we had like a runway of what was it, 18 months or 2 years, and we thought this would give them sufficient.
I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but happy to go to the decision and refer back to that.
So my memory was that when I asked the team, if they raise this kind of money with the $50 million, and they do a reasonable job, what's the runway? And my memory is about 18 months. I could be off, and we'll get back to you on that. But I think the broader question is, if you've got, and this has always been the issue here, right? And we've talked about this a million times. If you've got reimbursement rates that are lower than our neighboring states in Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial, if you have a patient mix which is highly Medicaid, 40%, 30 to 40% Medicaid across the entire healthcare landscape of Rhode Island, and these hospitals probably closer to 40%, where the reimbursement for a typical procedure, let's just say it's a $100 procedure reimbursement from Medicare, you're getting $37 from Medicaid and $200 from commercial. You have a lot of Medicaid patients. When you put all that together, that's why the future for any hospital system in Rhode Island is not great unless we change those fundamentals across the board. And we can do it, but we have to be deliberate about it. So steps forward today. I expect the transaction to close. We won't be in bankruptcy court in Dallas. Huge step forward. The financing will be there completely within 90 days. You got $50 million in cash coming from us, which is, these hospitals have no endowment. So that's a step in the right direction. The workforce is great. So the care out there will be terrific. But the finances, the structural finances in the long term are the problem, not just for them, but for everybody.
Can I ask?
What have they?
Let me just go to, I'll come back to it.
One second. I'm just confused about one thing here. It says we'll secure up to an additional 35 million. Does that mean there's a possibility it could be less?
No, they have to get to 35 million. They've got to true it up to $80 million.
Okay, so that up to, I was just confused why it says.
Yeah, it's odd. It's odd lawyer phrasing.
Okay, thank you.
But they have to bring it up to $80 million, and that's spelled out expressly in the conditions.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Steve.
What have they actually raised so far? I understand that they haven't completed fundraising, but what have
Yeah.
they actually had so far?
Yeah, I don't know what they have in hand, but I'm told that they can raise what they've represented that they can raise. If they come back a third time, I'm going to be a little unhappy, frankly.
Do you know
It's been a lot of work to get to this point.
Do you know with the decrease to 45 million raised up front when they're expected to close?
Well, I believe the original, excuse me, the original anticipated date was by the end of August. That's still my hope. There's still, some steps they got to jump through to do that, but I would hope by end of August, mid-September, and then they can begin to get this thing going.
Can you talk a little bit more about, you said the negotiations were quite tense. Can you
Intense. Yeah, look, I think, they principally took place in an office in Newport at Adler, Pollock and Sheehan with myself and Sarah and Adi Goldstein and Ben Mingle and a fellow from Barclays and Richard Beretta, and we just, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to move unless they were able to true up that $80 million somehow. And then they told us, and I used the same line I used with you guys. if we're the biggest investor, I'm just not gonna keep making a weak deal weaker, without some assurances that this can actually work. I mean, as I said, I'd rather go back into bankruptcy court and see if we can, rustle up a buyer. And so, that's not the first time, that I've been in that situation. But I do feel like, at some point you gotta get the principals in the room, you gotta hammer it out. And we were able to do that. But like most negotiations where, we were pretty strong in what we expected, and we weren't, we weren't going from 80 million we weren't going from 80 million to 45 million without any sort of sense of, right, how are you going to true this up? Number one, convince us you can do it, and then, give me additional safeguards so that if I see things beginning to spiral, I can step in and take some action.
Can I ask one?
Of course, you can ask me what you want.
So, the idea that you'd rather go back to bankruptcy court and find a new buyer, I mean, who's to say that in 3 months they can't, finance the rest of it, or in a year with cutoffs to state-directed payments and changes at the federal level and everything that's already
Sure.
been happening in Rhode Island, we're back in bankruptcy court. Wouldn't it be better to start that process now? It
No.
sounds like you still don't have a lot of faith in it.
Yeah, no, because I want to be here.
Okay.
I don't want to be in a Dallas courtroom with a judge who may not give a darn about Rhode Island. I have a son who lives in Dallas. I can tell you it's a long way from Rhode Island. So I want to be here. I want to be with a judge like Judge Silverstein when he was still on the bench, or Judge Stern, who understands Rhode Island, frankly cares about Rhode Island. Although this bankruptcy judge has been excellent. I don't want to suggest all that she hasn't been. She's been terrific. But you don't know what you're going to get when you're in a bankruptcy court. I've always, one of the reasons why, one of my considerations in approving the transaction in the first place was just to get them away from Prospect so that we would have Rhode Island control over them. And so that to me is a significant step forward. But you're right, we could be in an insolvency situation 18 months from now. I hope not. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. But I can't stand up here and tell the public what they'd like to hear. I have to tell them what the truth is, and I think that's really important. That's when you're an elected official, you got to be candid and honest with the public. You can't gaslight them.
Is this your last and final offer at this point? I mean, if they can't get their financing together and they come back a third time, what's your response? Are you going straight back to bankruptcy court?
They've told me, they've assured me that they'll agree to the conditions and they can meet them. So,
And if they can't?
well, if we can, Alexa, we'll see. Potentially, I'm not afraid of going back to bankruptcy court. I'm not afraid of it. And I think frankly, to get to a place that protects Rhode Islanders the best, you can't operate in fear. You have to understand the challenges ahead and just be willing to take them on and work towards the best outcome. And that sort of approach has always served me pretty well, frankly.
Who are these Centurion people? Like, who is the John
Who are
Fernandez
these
of
guys?
Centurion? Who is Michael Wagner of Centurion? Like,
Yeah.
it remains very mysterious to me. It's a
Yeah.
nonprofit. They've never done this before. They need
Sure.
debt financing. They don't have any money. They're going to run the hospital. Like, have you talked to who's in charge? Who's going to be?
Well-
is there going to be a Centurion Rhode Island CEO here running it? Like,
Well, I was in the room with Ben Mingle, and he is effectively the person who is spearheading, arranging the financing. Look, without that financing, there's no endowment. Even with our 50 million alone, they can't get off the ground. So they have to come up with the money somewhere. Look, if there was a different kind of buyer with, deep pockets, with a lot of experience in healthcare, I think even Ben would say, that would be pretty attractive. But we didn't have that option. Look, I've talked to you about this before, when there was concern about this some time ago, and I can't remember exactly what caused me to do it. I think it was after we knew they couldn't meet the conditions. I had conversations with a lot of other, New England healthcare systems. Like, they weren't interested. Nobody's interested in buying these hospitals. I mean, Brown bought 2 hospitals out of state. I've said this before, when Brown is buying hospitals out of state, just like these hospitals, and not buying these, it tells you everything you need to know about Rhode Island healthcare. It makes no sense for Brown to buy 2 hospitals on the other side of the border unless they make more money. Every patient that walks through the door in Massachusetts makes Brown University Health more money than every Rhode Island patient who walks through the door. That's just a fact. So we're not doing well here, just the opposite. Until we make a Rhode Island patient mean the same financially as a Massachusetts or a Connecticut patient, our hospital systems and our providers and our workers are always going to be at a state of disadvantage. I believe that the reason we can't settle some of our work disputes is there's not enough money in the system to pay for everything, including fair wages for labor. So all of these things are symptoms of the same fundamental problems. It's Brown buying hospital systems in other states. It's intractable labor negotiations. It's a lack of providers. We all know this is the state of play. And we just have to admit it, and then when we come back next year, all those voices in Newport, so strong, need to be out with other Rhode Islanders in next spring. I said to a group of, I can't remember who I was talking to, but a group of doctors asked me how they could help, and I said, well, the next time we have a press conference trying to raise primary care rates from Medicare to Medicaid to Medicare, and I think there were 10 doctors who showed up. We had lots of, Lynn was there, we had lots of nurses and other healthcare professional staff, but I need 30 or 40 doctors in white coats with the stethoscopes. Don't show up looking like LL Bean models, you know? Wear the white coats. I think doctors for some reason won't wear the white, my son won't wear the white coat. That's what Rhode Islanders want to see. That's what's going to message our leaders to say, look, when doctors are there, when and not just, our nurses and other professional staff, when they're sending these messages as to why they can't get people to come, look, my neurologist closed his practice. Nobody took it over. There's no neurologist between Westerly and Newport. That's the state of play in Rhode Island. We got to fix it.
So do you expect most of the people running Roger Williams and Fatima day to day right now to be kept in place, and we're just changing
I'm sorry, Ted.
the corporate
the mystery. So Dr. Jeffrey Liebman is going, and his management team are going to continue to operate these hospitals. Ben Mingle will be involved, and his team will be involved. But yeah, it will be a hospital system. There'll be a local board. There will be community involvement on that board. All of that is in our decisions. It's going to be, Lynn and her team will continue to provide great care for patients. But that management team's got to turn it around, and we'll see how they do. We're going to be keeping very close eye, and I know that UNAP will be too. I know that I'll hear from them if things are going sideways. But we're going to be paying close attention. Yeah, Alexa, yeah.
Can you paint a picture of what it's actually like in those hospitals right now? Because over the last few years, while this deal has been ironed out by executives, this office, I mean, there have been surgeries that have had to be rescheduled. In January, Prospect owed $400 million to vendors. There have nationally. In Rhode Island, a lot of supplies haven't been delivered to these hospitals. The conditions of these properties are dismal. Can you just paint a picture of what it looks like right now?
Yeah, look, I think they are safety net hospitals that need both not only in the physical plant, but elsewhere a lot of work. There's no doubt about that, but that's why we have insisted that at least $50 million be spent on capital improvements. I'm certainly aware of the vendor issues. We went to court to make them pay. And it was their failure to pay that, in my view, caused them to violate the conditions, which is why we're sitting on $50 million of cash. It's their money. They violated the conditions by not paying vendors. We went to court to make them pay the vendors, and we kept their money. That's a pretty good outcome for Rhode Islanders. We didn't have to go to the taxpayers for $50 million. We squeezed it out of a bunch of rich people in California who screwed this thing up to a fare thee well in the beginning. So I feel really good about that. But yeah, but look, I just got a call before I came down here from a friend who took his mother to an ER in Rhode Island last night, and he said it was a blank show. In fact, my whatever it does says on my phone, the phone now bleeps out. At least in the written transcription, it bleeps out swear words. Anyway, he used a swear word. He said it was complete chaos. There weren't enough doctors, there weren't enough nurses, there were about 100 people there. It's not just these hospitals. I mean, I was just out in Chicago, where my son is a resident, and I went through Northwestern Health. And you walk into that place, you cannot believe it. I have my chief of staff with me. You cannot believe that place is pristine. It is pristine. It looks like a place where people can go and get great care. Now, whether they get great care there or not, I don't know. Maybe their nurses aren't as good as ours are. So the physical plant, though, is maintained and it's clean. Some of it is new. Granted, it's Chicago, but the buildings are connected. That's where we need to get. Our problem is revenue in the system.
Is Charter Care up on their bills currently?
I can't answer that, but if they weren't up on their bills currently, in other words, if Prospect weren't paying their bills, then we would be in court to make them pay them. So there isn't going to be this huge backlog of bills that are going to wash all of this money to get them going forward away.
And any existing balance to vendors or anybody else, that has to be
That's going to be squared up at closing.
Right, okay.